Amount of time I could spend sitting down when I first started doing the series, but that's kind of corrected itself now. And
For years, Richard Boone stepped into the black-clad presence of Paladin like a man who carried both power and quiet restraint. As Paladin, he wasn't just a gun for hire. He was measured, thoughtful, and often one step ahead of the chaos around him. That calm authority became his signature, the thing audiences trusted. But by the time his final episode arrived, something had changed. The confidence was still there, but it felt heavier, more reflective. It was no longer just about control. It was about where, time, and everything the character had endured. So what made that last appearance hit so differently? And why does it still linger long after the screen fades to black? Join us as we get into all the details, the man behind the gun, Richard Boone's unforgiving path to fame. Before the black suit, before the quiet authority of Paladin ever settled in, Richard Boone came from a lineage that carried its own weight. Born in Los Angeles, right in the middle of Cecile and Kirk Boone's household, his story already stretched far beyond the city. His father moved through the world of law with precision, while his mother, the daughter of Russian immigrants, carried a different kind of resilience. And somewhere deep in that family line sat Squire Boone, tied to the frontier legacy of Daniel Boone, a reminder that endurance, in one form or another, had always been part of who he was. But none of that pointed neatly to where he would end up. At Hoover High School, he was just another student finding his footing. Then came Stanford University, a place that should have shaped a clear future. Instead, it became the first sign that Boone didn't move in straight lines. He walked away before finishing, drifting into work that felt far removed from anything resembling a spotlight. Oil rigs, bars, paint jobs, and writing. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even stable, but it was movement. And for Boone, that seemed to matter more than certainty. Then everything shifted. In 1941, he stepped into the structure of the United States Navy, and suddenly, life wasn't open-ended anymore. It was sharp, immediate, and unforgiving. Out in the Pacific during World War II, Boone wasn't observing from a distance. He was in it. Aviation ordnanceman, air crewman, tail gunner aboard the Grumman TBF Avenger. Roles that demanded focus, control, and a kind of quiet nerve that didn't announce itself, but had to be there. By the time he left, carrying the rank of Petty Officer First Class, something in him had settled into place. Not loudly, but permanently. And yet, even before the war, there had been a hint, something easy to overlook at the time. At the San Diego Army and Navy Academy, under the guidance of Virginia Atkinson, he had been introduced to theater. It wasn't a defining moment back then, just an opening, a door that didn't seem urgent until everything else had been lived through. So when the war ended, Boone didn't return to the same uncertainty he had left behind. This time, there was direction. Using the GI Bill, he stepped into the actor's studio in New York, not as someone chasing a dream, but as someone who had already been shaped by experience. And that difference, that quiet weight he carried with him, would later become the very thing audiences couldn't look away from. The screen test, where the background actor became the star. By the time Richard Boone stepped onto the stage, there was already something about him that felt different, serious, methodical, almost deliberate in a way that didn't need to announce itself. In 1947, he made his Broadway debut in Medea, sharing the stage with Judith Anderson and John Gielgud. The production ran for 214 performances, but for Boone, it wasn't just about longevity, it was about presence. Even then, he wasn't playing for attention. He was building something quieter, something that held. That same current carried him into Macbeth in 1948, and from there, the movement didn't stop. It just shifted. Television was still finding its footing, but Boone stepped into it anyway, appearing in a short-lived adaptation of The Front Page, and then moving through anthology series like Actors Studio and Suspense. It wasn't about landing in one place. It was about staying in motion, learning the rhythm of different stages, different audiences, different demands. Then, almost without warning, the path narrowed again, back to Broadway. In 1950, he returned in The Man, directed by Martin Ritt, and performed alongside Dorothy Gish. It ran for 92 performances, but what mattered more was what happened just outside the spotlight. Elia Kazan had him reading lines during a screen test for Louis Milestone. The actress didn't land the role, but Boone did without even trying to. It wasn't his face that caught attention. It was his voice, controlled, grounded, enough to pull him straight to Hollywood and into a 7-year contract with Fox. And just like that, everything expanded. His screen debut came in Halls of Montezuma in 1951, where he played a Marine officer, a role that didn't feel like a stretch so much as an extension of what he already carried. Fox leaned into that, placing him in military roles in Call Me Mister and The Desert Fox, the story of Rommel. But Boone wasn't built to stay in one lane for long. By 1952, the roles were opening up. Red Skies of Montana, Return of the Texan, Kangaroo, and Way of a Gaucho. And in Kangaroo, something changed again. His role grew beyond what had been written, as if the script itself had to adjust to him. By 1953, he was working under Elia Kazan again in Man on a Tightrope, moving through films like Vicky and City of Bad Men with a steady kind of presence that didn't need to dominate a scene to hold it. Then came The Robe, the first CinemaScope film. As Pontius Pilate, he had only one scene, but it didn't feel small. There was weight in it, especially opposite Richard Burton, where even a brief moment carried consequence. He followed that with Beneath the 12-Mile Reef, stepping into another piece of film history without breaking stride. But Boone wasn't interested in staying tied down. After the siege at Red River and the raid in 1954, he walked away from his Fox contract. It wasn't a dramatic exit. It was a decision. Another turn, another shift forward. Around that same time, a connection he had made during Halls of Montezuma began to circle back. His friendship with Jack Webb led him into the film version of Dragnet, but more importantly, into something steadier. From 1954 to 1956, Boone stepped into the lead role of Medic, a medical drama that made him a familiar face in living rooms across the country. It wasn't flashy, but it was consistent, and in 1955, it brought him an Emmy nomination for Best Actor in a regular series. Even then, he didn't slow down. While carrying Medic, he moved between films and television with ease, stepping into westerns like 10 Wanted Men with Randolph Scott, Man Without a Star with Kirk Douglas, and Robber's Roost alongside George Montgomery. There was Battle Stations, Star in the Dust, and Away All Boats, each role adding another layer, another shade to what he could do without ever feeling forced. At the same time, television kept pulling him back in. General Electric Theater, Matinee Theater, Lux Video Theater, Studio One in Hollywood, Climax. A steady stream of appearances that kept him present, visible, and evolving. And then came The Tall T in 1957. Opposite Randolph Scott, again, Boone delivered one of his strongest performances. Not loud, not exaggerated, but controlled in a way that made every moment feel intentional. He followed it with Lizzie alongside Eleanor Parker, and then The Garment Jungle, where he stepped fully into a villain's role without losing that same grounded intensity. By this point, something was becoming clear. Boone wasn't chasing roles, he was shaping them. And with each performance, he was moving closer to something that hadn't quite arrived yet, but was already beginning to take form. Dressed in Black, How Richard Boone Redefined the Western Hero. There's a Reason Have Gun. Will Travel still lingers long after its final episode fades out. It wasn't just another Western riding the wave of popularity. It felt sharper, more deliberate. The writing held weight, and at the center of it all stood Richard Boone, anchoring everything with a presence that didn't need to shout to be felt. For 6 seasons, from 1957 to 1963, the show carved out its own identity, so much so that it was often placed above Gunsmoke, even while both aired on the same network. At the heart of it was Paladin, not just a hired gun, but something harder to define. He lived in quiet luxury at the Hotel Carlton in San Francisco, moving through refined spaces with ease until a telegram would arrive. And just like that, the world would shift. Dressed in black, controlled and precise, he would ride out to meet whoever needed him. Sometimes a bodyguard, sometimes a stand-in for the law, sometimes something in between. But no matter the job, there was always that underlying tension, because Paladin didn't just work for money. He wrestled with what was right. And when those two things clashed, the outcome was never simple. Sometimes it ended with betrayal, sometimes with someone buried on Boot Hill, and always that calling card. Behind the scenes, the show carried that same level of intention. Created by Herb Meadow and Sam Rolfe, it was shaped by people who understood structure, tension, and restraint. Rolfe, in particular, held on to one quiet decision that changed everything. Paladin's real name would never be revealed. Even when the final season circled back to his origins, offering glimpses of who he might have been, that piece remained untouched. It kept the character just out of reach, and somehow that made him feel even more real. The role almost went in a different direction. Randolph Scott had been the first choice, but when he wasn't available, the producers turned to Boone, and what they found wasn't just someone who could ride a horse. It was someone who didn't look or sound like the typical Western hero. His voice carried a low, controlled growl. His face wasn't polished or easy. It had texture, weight, history, and that difference became the point. While other cowboys leaned on instinct, Paladin leaned on thought. He could step into a gunfight one moment, then casually reference Pliny the Elder or Aristotle the next. It blurred the line between intellect and violence in a way audiences weren't used to, and it worked. Boone earned an Emmy nomination, but more than that, he became a television presence people recognized instantly. The show turned him into a star almost overnight. A 5-year contract brought financial security, and a 1-year extension meant he could step back whenever he chose. But instead of slowing down, it opened more doors. He stepped into the Alamo alongside John Wayne, and by 1963, he was leading his own anthology series, The Richard Boone Show, a natural extension of everything he had been building. But the real strength of Have Gun, Will Travel was always in the writing. Names like Bruce Geller, Sam Peckinpah, Richard Matheson, and Gene Roddenberry weren't just contributing, they were shaping the tone. Roddenberry alone wrote 24 scripts, including Helen of Troy, which earned a Writers Guild of America award. The episodes didn't just follow a pattern, they explored something deeper: morality, consequence, choice. That's why some of the stories still feel unsettled. Paladin didn't always walk away clean. He faced crooked sheriffs who couldn't be reasoned with. He crossed deserts in races that pushed survival to the edge. He encountered young men who didn't understand violence until it was too late. And in one of the most chilling arcs, he hunted down a group of drunken boys who had committed murder, offering them a chance at justice, only to guide them, almost deliberately, towards a different end. Not out of cruelty, but out of a belief that justice didn't always live inside the law. It's that tension that stayed with the show and with him. Even the production carried a sense of scale. Episodes were filmed on location across Northern California, New Mexico, and Bend, Oregon, giving the series a grounded, almost cinematic feel. And yet, despite high ratings and strong popularity, it ended after 6 seasons. Not because it faded, but because it existed in a time when Westerns flooded television. As Milton Berle once joked about NBC, it had become nothing but cowboys. Still, Have Gun, a Will Travel didn't get lost in that crowd. It stood apart, and at the center of it, steady and unshaken, was Boone, carrying that same quiet control, that same weight, the kind that doesn't just define a character, but lingers long after the ride is over. Why Richard Boone hated the role that made him a millionaire. From the outside, Have Gun, Will Travel felt controlled, almost effortless. A man dressed in black, calm and precise, stepping into chaos and restoring order before riding off again. It looked steady, predictable even, but behind that image, something far more unstable was taking shape. The set carried a tension that never quite settled, and at the center of it stood Richard Boone, intense, restless, and impossible to contain for long. That tension didn't just sit quietly in the background. At one point, it broke through completely. Sam Rolfe, one of the creators of the show, clashed with Boone in a confrontation that turned physical, ending with Boone walking off set. It wasn't a shocking moment so much as a revealing one. Boone had always moved on impulse. He had already walked away from Stanford University, burned his landlady's furniture just to stay warm, and chased the idea of becoming something like Ernest Hemingway. There was a pattern there, a refusal to settle, a resistance to anything that felt too controlled. And yet, for 6 years, even with that friction simmering beneath the surface, Boone and Rolfe kept building something that worked, not smoothly, not comfortably, but effectively. What makes it even more interesting is how differently the show almost began. Before the horses, before the Western setting, Rolfe and Herb Meadow had imagined something far more modern. A detective in New York City, moving through stacks of newspapers each morning, scanning classifieds for people in trouble. When he found them, he would send a simple card. Have gun, will travel. It was a sharp idea, stripped down and direct. And for a moment, it almost stayed that way. But when Hunt Stromberg Jr. at CBS stepped in, the direction shifted. The network wanted something that could sit comfortably alongside Gunsmoke. So the city disappeared. The timeline rolled back, and San Francisco in the 1870s became the new setting. The idea didn't change. It just found a different world to live in. And once it settled there, it began to grow in ways no one could fully predict. The writers alone tell that story. Gene Roddenberry, Bruce Geller, Samuel A. Peoples, Harold Jack Bloom, names that would later define entire genres. Star Trek, Mission Impossible. Those legacies trace back in part to this one show. Even the production lineage stretched outward, passing through Desilu Productions and Paramount Television before landing under CBS Television. It's the kind of connection that only becomes clear when you step back and see the full picture. On screen, though, everything felt contained. Paladin moved through his world with quiet control, and just behind him was Hey Boy, the steady presence at the Carlton Hotel, played by Cam Tong. For a while, that balance held. Then, in the 4th season, it shifted. Lisa Liu stepped in as Hey Girl, while Tong moved on to the Garland touch. It was a move that promised something bigger, but it didn't last. The show collapsed quickly, and just like that, one steady presence was gone, replaced by something new that never quite carried the same weight. Behind the scenes, the tone of the show continued to evolve. In 1959, Frank R. Pearson stepped in as story editor, taking over from Rolfe during the 4th season. But instead of tearing things down, he leaned into what had already been built. He understood the rhythm, the restraint, the deeper layer beneath the action. So he kept it intact. He allowed Paladin to quote Aristotle, to move into conversations about politics and philosophy, ideas that didn't usually belong in a Western. His first episode followed a Russian Jewish fatalist seeking protection, weaving in themes of identity, culture, and nonviolence. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It just expanded the world quietly, giving it more depth without losing its edge. But not everything stayed within the story. There were questions about where the idea itself had come from. A rodeo performer named Victor da Costa had been using the name Paladin long before the show existed. The same black outfit, the same calling card. When the series gained popularity, he filed a lawsuit against CBS, claiming the concept had been taken from his persona. The case stretched on for years, and in the end, it was acknowledged that the producers had drawn from his image, not entirely invented, but adapted, reshaped, and brought into something larger than its origin. And he wasn't the only one. A Rhode Island writer, Marty B. Scott, came forward with a similar claim, that the idea of a cultured, educated gun for hire had been lifted from his own proposal. He won a settlement, but never lived to see it fully paid. His son would later receive what was owed. Another quiet conclusion, long after the spotlight had shifted elsewhere. Even within the show itself, there were signs of friction. It was one of the first Westerns to lean into something darker, more adult, more violent. And that didn't sit easily, especially with how many young viewers were watching. It pushed boundaries that earlier Westerns had avoided, creating a tension between what the show was and what audiences expected it to be. Then there were the smaller details that ended up shaping its identity in unexpected ways. Early on, Paladin's suit wasn't even black. It was midnight blue, chosen to complement Boone's eyes. But on black and white television, it didn't translate. So it changed. And that change became permanent. The image of the man in black, sharp and unmistakable. Then came the cost of success. By the 6th season, Boone was earning $1.3 million, a number that reflected just how powerful the show had become. But it came with a compromise. He gave up $400,000 in residuals, a decision that would later prove costly when the show found new life in syndication. It was immediate reward at the expense of the future, a trade-off that mirrored the kind of choices his character often faced. And maybe that's what makes all of this linger. Because even as the show climbed, consistently ranking in the top 5, holding both critical respect and audience loyalty, Boone himself was pulling in the opposite direction. The role that made him a star was the same one he began to resent, describing it as limiting, repetitive, and something that boxed him in rather than letting him move freely. So while Have Gun, Will Travel appeared steady on screen, behind it everything was shifting. Tension, reinvention, conflict, and somehow, through all of that, it held together long enough to leave a mark that still hasn't faded. The most unsettling finale in Western history, the end of Paladin. By the time Have Gun, Will Travel reached its final chapter, something had already begun to shift. Not loudly, not in a way that demanded attention, but quietly, almost beneath the surface. Because Richard Boone's last episode doesn't end with a grand farewell or a clear sense of closure. Instead, it leaves you with something harder to shake, the feeling that nothing really ends, even when it should. In The Lady of the Bank, Paladin is hired for what seems like a straightforward job: track down $10,000 owed by a rancher. It's the kind of assignment he's handled countless times before, controlled, methodical. But then the ground shifts. The rancher turns up dead, and suddenly what looked simple begins to unravel. Accusations fall on a band of gypsies, suspicion spreads, and the truth becomes harder to hold on to. And this is where the episode leans into something deeper. Because Paladin doesn't rush. He doesn't react blindly. He steps back, observes, and pieces things together with that same quiet precision that has always defined him. The gun is there, as it always is, but it isn't the center of the story. The focus shifts to something else. Investigation, judgment, the slow uncovering of what really happened. It's less about action, more about weight, about choosing what's right, even when the path there isn't clear. And as the truth comes into focus, there's no dramatic release, no moment that neatly ties everything together. Just resolution, and then movement. That's what makes it linger, because when the episode ends, Paladin doesn't stop. He doesn't settle. He doesn't look back. He simply continues riding off, just as he always has, leaving behind another story, another town, another set of choices that don't quite fade. It's familiar, almost routine, and yet this time, it feels different. He's still in control, still composed, but there's a quiet sense that everything he's carried up to this point hasn't left him untouched. And that's where the heartbreak sits, not in what happens, but in what doesn't. There's no final reckoning, no moment where the weight of it all catches up to him in a way we can fully see. Instead, it stays internal, unspoken, carried forward, the same way it always has been, the same way it always will be. Even beyond the screen, that sense of continuation holds. The series ends after 6 seasons and 225 episodes, but Paladin's world doesn't close. It simply keeps moving. The same rhythm, the same departures, the same man answering calls, stepping into conflict, and leaving just as quietly as he arrived. And even in the radio adaptation, where John Daner takes on the role, that motion continues right up to its own ending, where Paladin travels to Boston to claim an inheritance. A different story, but the same underlying truth. He never really stops. And maybe that's the point. Because in the end, Richard Boone's final episode isn't heartbreaking because of what it shows you. It's heartbreaking because of what it refuses to do. On the show that killed Paladin. Why Richard Boone risked everything on an anthology. After the long run of Have Gun, Will Travel, you might expect Richard Boone to settle into something familiar, something that carried the same steady rhythm. But that's not the direction he chose. Instead, he stepped into something far less certain, something that didn't rely on a single character or even a single story. That change became The Richard Boone Show. It arrived in 1963, almost immediately after Paladin rode off for the last time. But where that world had been focused and controlled, this one was open, constantly changing. An anthology series moving from one story to the next, never staying in one place long enough to settle. Boone didn't just lead it, he built it around a repertory company of actors who moved with him, shifting roles, trading parts, appearing again and again in different forms. There was a rhythm to that idea. Actors like Guy Stockwell and Robert Blake, still finding their footing, stood alongside more established names like Bethel Leslie, Jeanette Nolan, Warren Stevens, and Harry Morgan. No one stayed fixed in one role. No one was confined to a single identity. Each episode shifted, and with it, so did the people inside it. It wasn't about building a single character. It was about building a space where anything could happen. And Boone thrived in that movement. He hosted the series, stepped into about half of the episodes himself, and brought a kind of control that felt different from Paladin. Not restrained, but exploratory. It earned him an Emmy nomination, and the show itself picked up a Golden Globe. On the surface, it looked like a natural next step, a continuation of success, just in a new form. Behind it, there was weight. It was produced by Goodson Todman Productions, with writing that carried real presence. Names like Clifford Odets shaping the tone, and Buck Houghton guiding it as producer. Everything about it suggested intention, craft, a desire to push beyond what Boone had already done. But something didn't connect. Placed against Petticoat Junction on CBS, the show struggled to find its footing with audiences. It wasn't simple. It didn't offer the same familiarity people had come to expect. Week to week, it changed too much, asked too much, and moved too differently. And slowly, that gap widened. After just one season, it was gone. No long run, no syndication keeping it alive, no steady afterlife the way Have Gun, Will Travel had found it. It appeared briefly years later, but never fully returned. For something that carried so much intention, it faded quietly, almost the same way a paladin used to leave a town, present one moment, gone the next. And yet, there are traces that remain. The theme song, How Soon, composed by Henry Mancini, carried its own life beyond the show. Released as a single in the UK, it climbed into the charts, holding its place even as the series itself slipped out of view. A small echo, but an echo all the same. And when you step back, it starts to feel familiar. Because just like his final episode as Paladin, Boone didn't end this chapter with something neatly resolved. There was no long goodbye, no lasting hold, just a shift, a brief presence, and then absence. Not because it failed to matter, but because it never tried to stay in one place long enough to be easy. What episode of Have Gun Will Travel was your favorite? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.